Hi, welcome back to Genesis chapter 3. We're going to be starting at verse 14 with the curse. Now, the last time we had talked, we went through the first half of the chapter and we discussed how the man and the woman, Adam and Eve, fell from their state of innocence before God by eating the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. So by the end of verse 13, what God has done is he has just spoken to Adam and Eve, and he's extracted from them their very, very quick confessions to their crime. He has absolutely no questions whatsoever for the Nahash, because as we talked about last time, why bother asking the liar? He's just going to lie. He'll try to do more damage. So God is going to turn to the Nahash first. And why is he turning to the Nahash first? For judgment? Because he started this. So verses 14 and 15. So the Lord God said to the serpent, because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and all wild animals. You will crawl on your belly and you will eat dust all the days of your life. And I will put enmity between you and the woman and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head and you will strike his heel. Okay, so to curse someone, when you place a curse on someone, it is a statement of doom. It is a statement of fate. And when God is placing a curse on someone, it is most certainly effective. The reason why is because if I curse someone, I mean, what power do I have, right? But if God curses a man, that's it. That's the curse. Now, later on in scripture, we could talk about, hey, God says, if he curses somebody, but if they repent, then that curse can be lifted, and that's fine. But the Nahash is not going to be repenting. So he is laying out this curse on the Nahash. And this curse is first and foremost to be a fate worse than any um, than that which is on any land animal. It's like, wait a minute, what do you mean? Curse are you above all livestock and all the wild animals? Wait, are all the livestock and all the wild animals cursed? I thought God made everything good. Well, that curse is coming. So he's laying out his curse on the Nahash first, but we won't actually see what happens to all of the rest of creation until verse 17, because he's going to get around to talking to Adam. It's not going to be pleasant for the rest of creation either. Not because they did something wrong. Well, we'll talk about that in a bit. Okay. So he's creating a fate for the Nahash, and it's going to be worse for the Nahash than it's going to be for any of the animals, any of these land animals in particular. Animals struggle to survive, and they fight, and they they get hungry, they get sick, just like we do, and they struggle to survive from year to year to year, and eventually they all fall victim to something. They eventually just all die. For the Nahash, his fate is going to be worse. He was going to struggle even more than all these animals. His struggle is going to be far worse. He's not going to go out and eat fruit from the ground, and he's not going to find food available for him. Instead, he's going to eat dust for all of the days of his life. So the Nahash is going to struggle all the more. He's going to eat dust all of the days of his life. He's going to crawl on his belly in misery. His head is going to be brought down to the ground. He is going to continue to look for victims to deceive, but his fate is sealed. Now, the curse of belly and dust is actually fitting irony. See, the Nahash has taken on the form of a snake. So the Nahash is getting a fate that matches that of a snake. Okay, you want to look like a snake. You want to behave like a snake. Fine, you can be a snake. You want to take on the form of this creature which I made. Okay, have at, man. Whatever limbs he had, wings, legs, what gone. You, Nahash, are now going to crawl on your belly and you're going to eat dust. I know snakes don't actually eat dirt, but don't get caught up in that, because it's not like Moses thought snakes actually ate dirt. He understood what he was saying. The Nahash is going to be consuming dust. Okay, now there, of course, there's this debate on whether or not snakes had legs before the fall, and this is assuming that the snake is actually the creature that is cursed. The snake is not the creature being cursed; it's the Nahash being cursed. The snake, like everybody else, well, like all the other animals, is a rather innocent victim in this. Now, the phrase "all the days of his life," you're going to eat dust all the days of your life, actually implies something quite horrifying for the Nahash. You're going to die. An indirect statement of his impending death. And now, what does death look like for the Nahash? I mean, he is a creature of the heavens, not of the earth, right? So, are we talking about an annihilation where his the very fabric of his being is completely destroyed, and there's nothing left of him for all of eternity? Or are we talking about something that's like eternal torment and punishment, something like in hell? Well, does the text say? No, the text does not say at all. It just says he's going to die. So that is an issue you just have to leave on the table and shove down the road because that is not being given to us here. That is for future revelation. Um, oh yeah, what is the dust of the earth? So when you talk about the dust of the earth, the dust of the earth specifically is not the fruits of the earth. It is not the life. It is not what's growing. It is not what's good. It is the dead portion. It is the waste of the earth. It's the refuse of it. It is not of the goodness of the land. So he is not going to have any of the goodness that comes of the earth. Now, can we observe this today? Of course not, because we can't see the Nahash moving around the place. We can't see him. We don't see him eat. We don't. We haven't got a menu for him. You know, it's not like the Nahash goes to a restaurant and we can see what he's eating. Right? I like to order up some dust, please. We don't see that, and so it's very hard for us to put into our minds. Oh yeah, yeah, this is fulfilled here. Why? Well, the curse wasn't on us. I mean, we have our curse too. He's getting his curse and it is a brutal one. And as the scriptures go along, it doesn't get any better. It only gets worse for him. All right, to the woman. Oh no, verse 15. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel. Okay. Usually, references are to men and not to women. And so this means that when it says between you and the woman, it's not between you and the man. This is enmity is going to be between you and the woman. You took her on. You went to the woman to cause trouble. So guess what? This is where the enmity is going to be. Enmity is like hatred. I'm going to put hatred between the two of you. There's going to be this permanent war or feud between you. This means that the seed is not going to be the seed of man. It's going to be the seed of woman. That is, it's not going to be he's not going to be the descendant of a male. He's going to be descendant of a female. Now, how does that work? Well, it does work if the seed is of a virgin birth. That is a way in which it would work. Now, that's not necessarily how they would think of it at the time, but it is a way in which that statement about being from the woman and not from the man would be fulfilled. The term seed is singular, and it refers literally to a descendant. It can refer to, I mean, if you go to the most literal meaning, the seed is actually, it's actually a seed. But this is referring to, but because Hebrew, there's lots of meanings to this, and this meaning carries over into English as well, because we've had the Bible, since as long as English has been around. So seed refers to both that which would come from flora and fauna. It's refers to a descendant. Now, does it have to be a singular person descendant? No, it does not. It could be a representative group of the descendants. So, what it's saying here is in verse 15 is that there's going to be hatred between the descendant or the descendants, because it could be a group, of the woman and the descendant or the descendants of Nahash, because there's going to be enmity between you and the woman and between your seed and her seed. So these descendants, this enmity is going to continue on through time, which is the idea of a feud. When striking, though, the seed of the woman and Nahash crush or bruise each other. Okay, so this the kind of attack that they have on each other. It's actually using the same word. Okay, the version I used here, I think I got NAV up. Yeah, using NIV, he will crush your head and you will strike his heel. In other versions, it'll be he will crush your head and you will bruise his heel. The word means to crush or to bruise. It's that kind of force. And the word is shuf, which I think is just a great word because it sounds so wonderful. But it's shuf. It's a crushing or a bruising force. But it's the same against both of them. When striking each other, it's the head of the family. It's the head. Yeah, it's the head of the family that goes to war with the head of the other family because this is talking about a feud. So the head of the woman's family is going to go up against the head of the Nahash's family. And so when it says he will crush your head, that he is referring to the seed of the woman. And by the way, he is a very singular term here. He will crush your head. So that the seed of the woman is now being elevated as the head of the family of the woman. Now, you would normally think, well, wait a minute, this would be Adam who is the head because he is the eldest of the family. But that's not what God is saying here. He's saying that the seed of the woman is going to be in this position and you will strike his heel, which means that it's going to be the Nahash who's the head of his side of the family. So it's not going to be Adam against the Nahash. It's going to be some descendant from the woman's line who is going to be the head of the human side of the family, and then the Nahash himself is going to be the head of his family, and they're going to combat each other. Now, the word shuf, like I said, the word shuf means to crush or to bruise, but they both have different targets. So it's like, well, how do you know if it's to crush or to bruise? Well, it depends on what you're attacking. It's the same kind of force, but it's attacking two different things. And so in the one case, we're attacking the head, and the other case is attacking the heel. The term heel references following behind someone or undermining them. That is in the scriptures, that's what you would see if you were looking at heel, because like why a heel, right? So Genesis chapter 25, Jacob is named after the heel, or the term supplanter for grasping Esau's heel as they are being born. Just merely the fact that he grabbed Esau's heel told them, "Oh no, this is going to be a supplanter," and it turned out to actually be true. Genesis 49, Jacob says that Dan will be like a snake that strikes the heel of a horse, causing its rider to fall. This is the very fact that you can attack that heel and you can bring the entire thing down. That's the idea of it supplanting, undermining that which is quite frankly much greater. So this crushing or bruising his heel means that the Nahash is going to undermine or supplant the seed of the woman. He's going to attempt to undermine him. But the crushing or bruising a head is actually a blow against life. In the early world, the weapon of choice that they used was actually a mace or a rock, and so it's a pretty easy idea that if you take a rock or a mace and you smash it into somebody's head, that is a crushing or bruising force. By hitting them in the head, you're killing them, and so if it could be fatal, uh, then it will be against this creature if they are mortal, which God is pointing out to the Nahash that mortality is coming for him. So, in summation, this particular verse here, there's going to be hatred between the descendants of the woman, and the descendants of the Nahash. The Nahash is going to supplant the descendant of the woman, probably for a time, but the descendant of the woman will be victorious by killing or permanently wounding the Nahash. With Nahash's defeat, his entire lineage, because it's his side of the family, is going to fall. But with the descendant of the woman's victory, the woman's family will be saved. So ultimate victory is coming. Now, we understand when we're talking about the woman, okay, I get it. I get Adam and Eve. We're all descended from Adam and Eve. I understand the woman's family, right? Who on who are the descendants of the Nahash? I mean, is there like this progeny of the devil out there? I mean, what are we talking about? So the answer is yes, yes, there is. John 8:42 to 44. And understand, of course, Moses doesn't know the book of John yet, so he can cite what's going to come, but he doesn't necessarily have to understand all the details of what's coming. But Jesus, who is the seed of the woman, understands many more things. Jesus said to them, if God were your father, he's talking to the Pharisees here. If God were your father, you would love me, for I have come here from God. I have not come on my own. God sent me. Why is my language not clear to you? Because you're unable to hear what I say. You belong to your father, the devil. You want to carry out your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning, not holding to the truth, for there was no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks his native language, for he is a liar and the father of lies. Okay, so he's talking about the devil here. And of course, last time we had looked at a place in Revelation where, the devil or Satan is correlated directly with the Nahash. We know we're talking about the same creature here. So a couple of things. One, he was a murderer from the beginning. Who is the Nahash killing? Did he like pick up a knife and kill somebody? No. Who is he killing? He has killed the humans. He has, through his deception and through destroying their relationship with God, he has condemned them to death. Why? Why can I say that? He's a murderer from the beginning, not holding to the truth, for there's no truth in him. You see, being a murderer and holding to the truth are directly tied together here. It's through his lies that he has killed. He's a liar, the father of lies. Okay, the next part. Who are his descendants? Well, according to Jesus in John chapter 8, his descendants are all the people he's talking to right there. Those who carry out their father's desires. They're humans. They are humans who have chosen to reject God, who have chosen that they are going to go the other way. They are going to embrace the lies rather than embrace the truth. Going back to Genesis 1, we talked about the day and the night, the choice that you make. Are you going to be a creature of the day, or are you going to be a creature of the night? Are you going to be a human as God designed you to be, or are you going to be a human who rejects that, design? Are you going to go with God, or are you going to go oppose God? You have two options. And here he's saying that you can either be with me. If God were your father, you would love me, for I've come here from God. I've not come on my own. God sent me. You're either with him and you follow after God, in which case you are in that family, or you have rejected him, in which case you're in the other family. Now you may think to yourself, well, I didn't choose, Satan. I didn't pick Satan. You don't have to do the picking of Satan, because the picking is not I choose God or I choose Satan. And you're like, I go the third way. That's not how it works. I choose God or I choose not God. Satan becomes your representative. The Nahash becomes your representative because he is the father of rejecting God. He is of that ilk, and you end up all in that ilk together. He is going to be the representative of those who reject God, whether they like it or not. They're all going to end up in the same bucket together. Now, few people get to choose their side in a family feud, right? In a family feud like the game show. When there's a feud between two families, there aren't people who just get to pick their side. You're born into one of the two families. But in this case, That's just not the way it is. If you're not familiar with feuds, think of Romeo and Juliet, right? So you get the Montague family, you get the Capulet family, and when you try to do something different than feud, you end up dead because that's how feuds work. But in this case, we get to select our side. Not saying choose, choose. Who are you going to be with? You're either with me or you are not with me. Okay, verse 16. The curse on the woman. To the woman he said, I will make your pains in childbearing very severe. With painful labor, you will give birth to children. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. Oh, much to say on this. First of all, this curse on the woman, you will notice, is not a curse. He doesn't say, cursed are. Cursed are you. Nope. This is not actually a curse. This is a statement of reality. It comes in two parts. First, childbirth. Childbirth is not unique in humans that only humans experience pain in childbirth, uh, but it is actually on the higher end of pain among animals. And in the evolutionary sense, the argument is that the human's large head sizes in this, because of how big our brain is in constant competition with the need for a small hip size because we're bipedals, because we walk on 2 feet, and that there's always this competition between the two, and that's what drives the pain. And if your view of Genesis holds to evolution, you would understand that, or you would need to understand that. The word for pain here is it's bone, which when I wrote this down the first time, I had to go back and check it again because I'm like, it's a bone. That's how it's pronounced. It's a bone. And it refers to both physical and emotional pain or sorrow. So this is physical pain and emotional pain, both. So the pain here, um, you would know which it is based upon context. So the context is having children. So if you are a woman who's had children, would you say it's physically painful or emotionally painful? Well, my wife tells me it's both. and I can have this confirmed by a few other folks as well. It is both physically painful. Yes, it's directly physically painful right up at the beginning, but that's only the beginning of the pain. You see, there's much more pain as time goes by, and that much more pain comes from the fact that this child you are raising is not behaving like Jesus Christ. This child you are raising is a sinful, rebellious child who fights you intensely, okay, and causes all kinds of emotional and spiritual pain. And that pain, fact of the matter is, it's more painful for the mother than for the father in a general sense. Okay. You do get exceptions to this, but it's more pain for the mother than the father. And this is largely because emotional pain for women is much more intense than it is for emotional pain is for men. Well, why? Well, because emotions in women are much more intense than they are in men, for good and for ill. Women have much more emotion in the positive and the negative end. So this is going to be much more painful for the woman, both physically and emotionally. Now, there's a built-in irony about all of this because, of course, we had just talked about the curse to the serpent. Irony, the positive irony in here is that through this pain, through this childbirth, all this pain in childbirth, ultimately, eventually, her salvation will in fact come through childbirth. How? Well, because the seed of the woman is going to come literally through birthing children. So eventually, the time is going to come when a woman is going to give birth to a child through all of this pain, through all of this hurt that women have been experiencing over time for however many thousands of years. The time is going to come when the seed will be born, who will be the salvation. of all women and all men. The seed will come. And so salvation is going to come through childbirth. This is this statement is mentioned in First Timothy 2:15. First Timothy 2:15. And it's one of those great passages that is it kind of sticks out there like a sore thumb and you say, "Wait, what?" Because it's in the New Testament. We don't normally think when we're reading through the New Testament, we don't think about the Old Testament very much. And remember that the people who wrote the New Testament thought about the Old Testament all the time. So when they're writing things down, they're referencing back to what the Old Testament said on a regular basis. But when we come at it, we like usually study the New Testament without studying the Old Testament at all. And so we miss all of their ideas. I mean, imagine if you were like trying to, if you tried to watch, think of a great movie. Pick a movie. If you tried to watch like Star Trek, Star Wars 6, you try to watch Star Wars 6, but you hadn't watched 4 and 5 yet. You didn't know anything about them. You just like, boom. Like, see Luke come on the screen. You're like, who's this? Like, I don't understand the references here. I mean, who are I don't understand what's going on here. I mean, some things would sound very strange to you. Don't match the storyline at all. You're wondering what's this feud going on between Luke and Vader, and why are we so worried about this dude in black, and who in the world is the Emperor popping up? And it'd be very weird because you don't have the early part of the story, and that's often what we do is we walk into the New Testament. We don't know anything about the Old Testament, and so when we read things in the New Testament, they don't make any sense to us. So going into First Timothy chapter 2 to one of the passages that is very, very controversial in the modern day. Okay, verses 11 to 15. A woman should learn in quietness and full submission. I don't permit a woman to teach or to assume authority over a man or over her husband. She must be quiet. For Adam was formed first, then Eve. And Adam was not the one deceived. It was the woman who was deceived and became a sinner. But woman will be saved through childbearing if they continue in faith and love and holiness and propriety. Okay, so he's talking about um, the role of the woman should be in her life with her husband, with the church and whatnot. And I'm going to bypass all the arguments right there because that would take forever. The important point is he's talking about he jumps into talking about Adam and Eve. And why is he talking about Adam and Eve? What do they have to do with my marriage, right? Because Adam and Eve are the archetypal man and woman. It's like, remember, here in Genesis, we're talking about the man. I mean, that's literally what Adam means. And the woman, she doesn't have her name yet. Okay. She's just the woman, the man and the woman. They are the archetypes of who all of us are as men and women. And so he says, it wasn't the man who was deceived, it was the woman who was deceived and became a sinner. Okay. Much on that I won't get into. But woman will be saved. That is, the woman will be saved through childbearing. Wait a minute. What do you mean women are going to be saved through childbearing? What? Well, what is this? I thought women were saved by the grace of Jesus Christ. Here I'm reading through the New Testament. No, 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 no. It's like only men are saved through the grace of Jesus Christ, but women are only saved if they bear children. What is that nonsense about? Because he's talking about Adam and Eve. Okay, you have to go back to the beginning to Genesis to get this understanding. Well, but that's not what he says, is it? Is that what Paul wrote? Did he say, what I mean by this is I'm talking about this moment in Genesis where this happened? Every time you read a passage, you need to think to yourself, who wrote this? Who did he write it to? If you don't know those two things, you can come up with some really, really bad ideas. Who did he write this letter to? Remember, he, Paul, did not write you this letter. It wasn't written for you. It was written for Timothy. We're reading their mail. He's writing Timothy a letter. So there are many, 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 many things that Paul and Timothy have already discussed throughout their lives together because they ministered together for a long time. So he's not going to have to stop and give Timothy a lot of background and a lot of information. He's going to be giving Timothy bullet points at times to, hey, Timothy, remember this. He doesn't have to give him a lot of context, a lot of background. Just like if you're talking to your wife or to your husband and you say, ah, remember Athens? Oh, yeah, I remember Athens. And everybody else is going, what about Athens? Okay. He's giving him a statement. So it's going to be very, very abrupt. But we understand the background of the statement because we know he's talking about Adam and Eve. So you have to look back at Adam and Eve. He says the woman is going to be saved through childbearing. This is going right back to chapter 3. Chapter 3. She is going to be saved through the childbearing. In what way? And by the woman, he's talking about the archetypal woman, right? He's talking about Eve, the archetypal woman. She is going to be saved through childbearing. Eve represents all women. And so when we're talking about um when he's talking about instructions regarding women of the church, he's saying, look, this is what happens. That woman gets her salvation through childbearing, through having babies, not through having babies, but because women have the one baby, the one that mattered for all of us, the one that mattered for everyone, because it is through woman that Jesus Christ came into the world. This isn't a negative statement against women. This is a great positive. You see, it's not man who is saving the world through childbearing. It's woman. The blessing came to the woman. It's a blessing that salvation comes through woman. This is a positive statement. And then, of course, he gives a caveat. Look, if they continue in faith and love and holiness with propriety, because they have to be on the good side, right? They have to choose the daylight, not the night. Because if they choose the night, there's no salvation for them. And the same is absolutely true of men. It's not like he's saying, but men don't have to have faith and love and holiness. He's talking just about women here. Okay. So, 1 Timothy 2:15 is not some weird statement about only women who have babies get saved. Not at all. He's just talking about here in Genesis. Okay. The desire for husband. A woman's desire for her husband. Where are we at here? Okay, the second half of verse 16. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. Oh, yes, the modern gender war. Remember, Moses was not in the middle of a gender war. Okay? Most of history was not a gender war. It really wasn't. So he says, your desire will be for your husband. And this is super easy to mistranslate. Why? Because the modern gender war confuses all. If you want to understand this passage, we are very, very fortunate to have a passage very similar to this. The wording to it is very similar in Genesis 4:7. Okay, so we're going to hop over Genesis 4:7, and it says, Lord's talking to Cain. If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, here we go. Sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. So we're doing the same thing of desire and rule, okay? Sin desires you. It desires you. What do you mean? Is sin like sitting there going, "Oh, he is so handsome." No, not at all. What is sin trying to do? Sin is trying to control you. It's trying to manipulate you. It's trying to run your life. It's trying to get you to do what it wants you to do. Okay? So, what do we have here in verse 16 of chapter 3? Your desire will be for your husband. You're going to desire to run him, control him, to manipulate him, to get him to do what you want him to do. This is about power. He is telling the woman, you are going to want to control your husband. And he is going to rule over you. The word rule is not exploit. It's not that word. The word is mashal. It's the same word for when God said that the sun is going to govern the day. and the moon to govern the night. He's going to govern over you. Ah, man, well, I don't like my governor. Okay, that when the sun governs the day and the night, it doesn't like tell you what to do with your time. It just is giving you a context in which to live. And this would be true of the various governments. Most of the time, if you have a governor in an area, he really doesn't care what you do. He just sets the context within which you live. Think of it as having a really awesome umbrella that is holding out the hail and the rain and the storm so that you can work underneath that umbrella and you're free to do underneath that umbrella. But that umbrella is governing your limits because outside of this limit of right and left, there's no protection, but you can work within it. And so, um, the bad news here for the woman is that this relationship where she is going to try to dictate what her husband does, but he's going to govern her life. So there's a conflict. It's going to be a fight. It's going to be bad. It's going to get ugly between the two of them because you can't have two chiefs. It doesn't work. Now, is he cursing her with this? No, he doesn't say you're cursed this way. He's not instituting a new order of things. He is merely saying that these are the natural consequences for what has happened. This is just going to happen. He doesn't have to decree them to occur. This is just what's going to happen. This is the same thing as when a parent tells a child who is lazy or has a snotty attitude, all the bad things that are coming. Some of it may come at the hand of the parent by taking things away or by making things present that otherwise wouldn't be. Um, but it's not an infliction of terrible fate. It just is because the woman made a poor choice, and so she is getting the poor consequences of that choice. Okay, now, modern idea, a very modern idea is that husbands having authority is part of the curse that God has lifted with Jesus Christ. Husbands didn't have that authority. Adam didn't have that authority, but it's part of this curse that's put on the woman is, oh, a man's going to rule over you. But that curse is gone now since Jesus Christ came and lifted the curse. Okay, there's absolutely no evidence for this. Um, for one thing, you'd have to say the other curse has been lifted as well. Then, and as far as I can tell, childbirth is still painful. So, if the one side has been lifted, you think the other side would have been lifted. Um, Also, modern idea is forgetting what your desire for your husband will mean. Because after all, we don't want to say mean things about women that women won't behave perfectly. So saying that the woman will attempt to manipulate and control her husband, we want to forget what the verse actually indicates that. Well, if that's the case, then the statement just simply says your desire will be for your husband. What a curse. You're going to desire your husband? Oh, that's horrible. Horrible, I say. That's such a curse. Okay. That you see, that just doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, do you really think that Eve was wandering around going, "Ah, I don't need this man. He's like lame. He's not interesting to me." And that was normal life right up until, she ate the fruit, and then God says, "As a curse, you're gonna like him." No. Nope. Just no. Okay, so this isn't a statement that God is now putting women under the authority of man. Plus, in that First Timothy passage, what Paul's direct statement is that the husband's authority is not based on the curse. It's based on uh, it's based on the order of creation. That is, man was made first, and then the woman. Um, and I can understand why people would look at that and say, "So I get it, but you know what? We don't have to understand the logic of it. We really don't have to understand the logic of that." Now, if you sit there and say, "Well, I think that's terrible because look, you're going to be fighting against thousands of years of humans who it totally made sense to. That completely made sense to them. I mean, if you were to take Paul and challenge him to his face, just bring him back from the dead and say, Paul, that doesn't make any sense. He'd look at you confused. How does that not make sense? Of course, he's like automatically on his face. Seems to make sense. I mean, it's like in the modern day, we don't respect our elders. Look, just because you're 60 and I'm 12, you know, what does that mean? Why do you think you have authority over me? Because he's 60 and you're 12. Okay. We don't in our culture understand respecting elders. Why would we even begin to understand respecting that you would respect somebody because their archetype came first? So that's just our cultural problem. Now, it can be terrifying for many women to have their husbands govern the family. It can be very, very terrifying. Why? Well, because for the woman, she feels completely out of control. It's like, okay, I have this stupid man, and he's running the show. Okay, first of all, why is he a stupid man? At least from talking to ladies, correct me if I'm wrong, but men say women are crazy, and women say men are stupid. And that's kind of what we all learn from the time we're little children. Yeah, girls are all crazy. Yeah, boys are all stupid. Okay. Um, how did that thing go? Boys are from Jupiter because they're all stupider. Is that how that works? I don't know. So you grow up with this idea that boys are just dumb. And then you get married to one and you're like, oh, he's just dumb. He doesn't understand things. That can lead you into a lot of fear. And that fear has been around for a very long time. First Peter 3, uh verses 1, 2, 5, and 6. Yes, I'm skipping verses 3 and 4 because they're not relevant. Okay, so what Peter said here, I'd like to say what the first Peter said here, is wives in the same way submit yourselves to your own husbands, so that if any of them do not believe the word, they may be won over without words by the behavior of their wives when they see the purity and reverence of your lives. Skipping the two verses, for this is the way the holy women of the past who put their hope in God used to adorn themselves. They submitted themselves to their own husbands, by the way, like Sarah, who obeyed Abraham and called him her Lord. You are her daughters if you do what is right. And here's the interesting thing, do not give way to fear. Now, that's interesting that Peter is jumping in there and saying, look, the problem here is let's lay it down at the beginning. Do what is right and don't give way to fear. It's kind of like Peter knows that fear is the driving factor here. Now, I am not a woman, and I'm certainly not all the women, but I've met a couple of women, and um, that seems to be a prevailing factor is fear. How do I? Uh, uh, one gal I knew, she's like, "How do I make him do this?" I'm like, you don't. Okay, so how do I make sure he does it? You don't. But the consequences are going to be bad. It's, that's scary. It's scary. You're under the governance, if you will, of another human being, and if they do something dumb, you get to reap the consequences. Yes. Yes. Well, must be nice being a guy. Really? Have you looked around? I seem to be under the governance of a lot of different people. When I go to work, any day, I could get a stupid assignment. I could be laid off. My government could decide to go to war and get me killed. Or they just decide to raise my taxes and drive my family out of their home every single day. Every single day, there are risk factors coming from governing authorities. It does seem to be more terrifying when they are close. Or you would say, if your governors are stupid. And so if you live with the idea that that men are stupid, as a general rule, it's going to be really scary to be under the governing authority of a man. Yeah, it is true, though, that lots of men are just simply terrible leaders. One lady I knew, it was really sad because she was really, really smart, incredibly intelligent woman. And her husband was not. And she was struggling to figure out, how do I respect my husband when he's a very not smart man and he makes very, very poor decisions. That is hard, but it can be done. I know I'm not going to go through the details of how to do that because every life is a little bit different. But yes, we did some working together on that. Okay. Another important factor in here, since we're on the whole thing about women submitting to their husbands and all kinds of other things that make a lot of women very, very mad, the call to submit is always given to the wives to enforce upon themselves. It's not given to the men to enforce upon their wives. That is not how that works. The man is not told, make sure your wife submits to you. That would be a very terrible idea. That would not be loving your wife like Christ loves the church. How do we know this? Well, Christ wandered around a lot, said a lot of things to a lot of people. And you know how many people he said, I'm going to make you submit to me, and I'm going to make you do what I want you to do. That wasn't how he did it. He invited them to. And those who came, came. And those who didn't, didn't. And that's how love works. The invitation goes out, and there are those who accept it, and there are those who do not. So, wives, love your husbands. Submit to them as your leader and help them out because we desperately need it. Because look, being a leader doesn't mean you actually know what's going on. All right, 17 to 19. To Adam, that is to the man, he said, because you listened to your wife and ate fruit from the tree about which I commanded you, you must not eat from it. Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil, you will eat from it all the days of your life, and it will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow, you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you will return. Now, here we go, an actual curse. The Nahash was cursed, the woman was not cursed, and here we see a curse again. But is the curse directly against the man? Well, no. The curse is against the ground. It is against the creation. It is against the thing which God made good. Verses 17 to 19. To Adam he said, because you listened to your wife and ate fruit from the tree about which I commanded you, you must not eat from it. Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil you will eat from it all the days of your life, and it will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken. For dust you are, and to dust you will return. This here is an actual curse. It's not like the statement against the woman where this is just the way things are, these are the natural consequences. This is a direct curse. This is God inflicting a punishment. But notice here, he's actually not inflicting the punishment directly on Adam. God blunts it. God blunts the punishment to Adam by actually inflicting the ground instead. So instead of assaulting Adam per se, like he does with the Nahash, he hits the ground that Adam needs in order to live. Cursed is the ground because of you. And so, as a consequence of this curse, it's going to produce thorns and thistles. It's going to be nasty. It's going to be difficult. The trees aren't just going to grow for you. They're not just going to provide you fruit for free. You're going to have to go out and, by the sweat of your brow, you will eat your food. And then he gives them the final statement until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you will return. Man thinks of himself as high, important, enough in order to make his own moral determinations, in order to say, well, what does God really know? I know about me. And God's statement is, you're dust. I made you out of dust, and you're going to go back to dust. Now, this is not a curse that's given to Adam because, as some people have said, because you listened to your wife. How dare you? Never listen to your wife. No, it was a two-part statement. You listened to your wife and you ate fruit from the tree about which I commanded you. You must not eat from it. You see, it wasn't listening to his wife that was the problem. It was about what she wanted him to do. She wanted him to do something that itself was wrong, and he accepted that. This isn't about the fact that he has communication with his wife. This is about the fact that he is guilty for acceding to sin. He has chosen to bring that sin upon himself. Also, the ground is not cursed, as we see here, because of Eve. The ground is cursed because of Adam. Now, wait a minute. I thought it was Eve who sinned first. I mean, it says so in Genesis, and doesn't Paul make a big point of that to Timothy? Eve sinned first, but the buck stops at Adam. Now, this is not easily explainable in our current gender war world. But Adam did, in fact, have the authority. Adam was the governing person in the relationship. It was his authority, and he was there, and he let the woman eat from the fruit and did nothing to stand in the way. He just let it go. And because of that, the curse lands on him. He was in charge. Now, as the Pentateuch continues, the rest of creation, you will see, is subjected to this curse, the curse that man deserved. Man deserves the curse, but it's nature that gets hit with this curse. Why is this? Well, for example, like in Exodus 13, the Lord gives instructions about redeeming the firstborn male. Every son is to be redeemed. That means to be purchased by sacrificing an animal in his place. You see, his life is forfeit, but we're not going to sacrifice the child. We will sacrifice an animal in his place. The animal takes the hit. The animal who did nothing wrong, just an innocent animal, takes the hit so that the human who is a sinner can be spared. Animal sacrifices are there to pay the price for human sin, even though they're innocent, because God put the animals in the way of the humans. Why? Because they were there to stave off the wrath of God until the time would come in which a right, proper sacrifice could be put into place again to stand between the wrath of God and humans. Because we deserve the wrath of God. We deserve the wrath of God for all of the wickedness that we have invoked upon each other, upon nature, upon God Himself. We have invoked horribleness upon everything that we touch, and yet God waits on that wrath. The sacrifice through there, so God is going to hold back on the wrath until He can put a sacrifice in place which will be appropriate. And that sacrifice, of course, as we know, living after Christ, was Christ Himself, the seed of the woman who is going to be victorious. Now, not like Nahash, the man receives a judgment about what he will eat. The easy path for him has been removed. But unlike the Nahash, his curse is lighter. He's not cursed to just eating dust. He can still eat what he can grow. On the other hand, he has to toil and labor for it, and he is inflicted with pain. This word for pain is the same word that's used for the woman in the pain of childbearing. That means it's both physical and emotional pain. And indeed, if you've worked a day in your life, you know that there is pain that comes from work, especially as time goes by, because the work doesn't lighten up, but you get older. And then the fingers and the knees and the ankles ache. And eventually he gets here with this statement about death. Now, the Nahash, for him, it's an indirect statement about for all the days of your life. But with Adam, he's very blunt and very clear until you return to the ground. Since from it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you will return. He wants he wants the man to understand exactly what's happening here. Death is coming because you are a mortal creature and you will die. Death gives him a sense of futility because man can project into the future. He can think into the future. And he understands now the futility of his entire life. If you don't have progeny, if you don't have sons and daughters, what do you have? What do you have? Everything you build is just going to what? You die. You don't take it with you. You just die. And then it goes to who? It's divided, goes to somebody who you hired. Who's it going to go to? If you don't have a son or a daughter, if you don't have progeny, to whom does this go? What does your life mean? See, like we talk about, like in the Lion King, you know, the circle of life. Great idea. It's a terrible idea. It's bleak. It's horrible. It's like, you know, we live and then eventually we die and we become plants, and then the plants are eaten by the giraffe, and then the lion eats the giraffe, and the lion dies and you're eaten by plants. It's like, oh, jeez. It's bleak. It's like that old phrase, life sucks and then you die. Futility. By the way, later in Genesis, there will be, I mean, a large section of the life of Abraham is all about chasing that. The futility of having a life where you have no progeny. You must have a child, or else what? Verses 20 and 21. Adam named his wife Eve because she would become the mother of all the living. The Lord God made garments of skin for Adam and his wife and clothed them. Okay. The word Eve in English comes from the Greek, which is Eva, and the Hebrew for that is actually kava. Yeah, kava. And it's a word similar to the word living, which is the idea here. Um, she is the one who is going to be um, the source of all living beings. She is going to be the mother of all the living people. And here, in order to cover up their shame, God kills an animal, and that is that God offers the first sacrifice, the very first one, because the man and the woman don't know what they're doing. I mean, clearly they wore fig leaves. So so he kills the first animal. He makes the first sacrifice for the express purpose of covering their shame, of covering that nakedness, of covering that shame. He covers them up. And this is this is the beginning of this sacrificial system, covering up the shame of man and woman for their sin. And it's going to end up being a constant repetition over time of the animal having to pay the price for what we have done. And it's setting up for thousands of years the coming of the Son of God, who had to pay the price for what we have done. Now, when the Son of God pays the price, he actually does so effectively because an animal can't actually resolve your guilt problem. But the Son of God can. He can resolve your guilt problem because he is an actual worthy sacrifice. That is, the human is of such significance that the blood of an animal can never resolve that. You can't, through killing 1,000 animals, you cannot cure the problem of your own soul. That has to be done in a very special way. And the Son of God fulfills that specialness that is necessary. Okay. Now, the horror to the man and the woman during this particular sacrifice had to have been incredibly intense because it's not lost on them what's happening here. They know they are at fault. They know that they should pay the price. And yet, here is an animal in the garden of God, where everything is supposed to be perfect. There, in that place, God kills an animal in order to cover their shame. And now they have to wear it. And as much as their nakedness was a continual reminder to them of what they had done, wearing the skin of an innocent animal was just as much so. They were never going to be able to shed themselves of this continual shame. 22 through 24. And the Lord God said, "The man has now become like one of us, knowing good and evil. He must not be allowed to reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat, and to live forever." So the Lord God banished him from the Garden of Eden to work the ground from which he had been taken. After he drove the man out, he placed on the east side of the Garden of Eden cherubim a flaming sword flashing back and forth to guard the way to the tree of life. All right. So now the man and the woman faced death. They faced a continual degradation until the point at which they were going to die. Because as God told Adam, you're dust and you're going to return to dust. They could never again be permitted to extend their lives through the tree of life. So we understand it's actually the tree of life that God has given them that is the means by which their bodies were to be restored to eternal life. Without, presumably, with that tree of life, we could do the same. It's very hard to say. But certainly they could do that by eating from this tree. And God says, no, done. We cannot let this continue. Why? Because they know good from evil, like God does. Well, I mean, if God knows for good from evil, why does he let himself live forever? You see, God has infinite wisdom. Man has partial wisdom. God has infinite self-control. Man, barely any. Instead, we seem to revel in our evil. Death, for us, becomes a necessary end cap on the amount of damage that each individual human can do. Now, obviously, for a lot of people, that comes terribly early in life. It's like, well, that person, I mean, a child who dies did very little. On the other hand, you see some people who are really vicious and died far too late. But you know what that isn't? It's not letting the evil person live forever to do an unlimited amount of damage. Living forever itself has actually been the dream of humans since, well, pretty much forever. We've always wanted to live forever. You know, in the Egyptian with the Egyptians, they had their tree of life, the pear seed. See, I know what this thing is. The pear seed, the avocado. It's amazing. We're still trying to use the avocado to live forever. They had the pear seed tree, and they were trying to use this idea of having a tree of life. They would entomb and mummify their pharaohs so they could live forever. That was the idea. In more modern times, we got the fountain of youth. It's going to give you youthfulness again, and you can live forever. Indiana Jones, the whole story about the search for the Holy Grail, it was all about making sure you could have access to this thing by which you could live forever. And of course, you have to give this up. Um, in the modern day, we've got two more using digital solutions, technology in order to upload our brains into a system that will never die, which is somewhat terrifying. Or through our own biological advancements. In biology, we've been learning more and more about about the body and why our DNA degrades and how to keep it going. Maybe, just maybe, we'll be able to reach the point where one day, through the right pills or through the right therapy, you'll be able to live forever. Wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't that be wonderful? Like many ideas about utopia, once you implement it, you discover it is just the worst. I mean, what are the consequences of humans today living forever? Just think about it. First of all, who would be allowed to live forever? Well, automatically it'd be the richest people and the most powerful people. Are you really sure you want the richest, most powerful people in the world to live forever? Well, maybe if you get to pick which ones, but you know that's not how that would work. Instead, you'd have dictators who just never die. But rest assured, the way it always is that the good, wholesome folks, those are the folks who would get to suffer the ramifications of death. Well, the wicked people are the ones who would live. And so this end cap is placed on everyone. That is to prevent us from getting away with that. All right, some further thoughts. Moses' primary interest in giving this story is not about relieving our curiosity. That's just not what it's about. There's great curiosity out there, and Moses is going to give us a few more things in the chapters to come, but he's not there to relieve our curiosity. He's trying to tell us particular things. Instead, this is about the introduction of the world as a foundation of our faith in God and for the Hebrew law. That is, we need to understand the world from whence it came from and the source of the problems that we have, and that will help us to understand what's going on. What is God actually doing? Because of this, the rest of Moses' text, that's Genesis through Deuteronomy, is going to rise up out of this story. It's just like this story is at the root level, right? And it's going to come up out of this story like a growing bush. We're going to see the trunks first, and then there's going to be branches, and then the leaves, and then it'll flower out and look all pretty. So here we are at the ground level, down where the roots are, at the introduction of the problem, and from here, everything after is going to come. And what comes after is the beginning of the solution to the problem introduced in Genesis 3. The beginning of that solution to the problem that was created by our ancestors, the first man and the first woman. Now, by the beginning of the solution, I mean that Moses, he's not going to live long enough to see the promises um, unfold that God has given. He's not going to actually see what's coming. Here he is laying out the seed of the woman, but he doesn't know what that seed is. He's not going to live long enough to see that. Instead, he can only look at the promise and welcome the solution from a distance. God, whatever you mean by that, I sure welcome it. Oh, we might ponder what it was like to live in the world before the coming of Christ. I mean, have you ever thought about that? It's like, oh man, I wonder what it was like to live in a world before Jesus. I mean, what did it really mean to be faithful to God? What did that really look like? And how would a person think if they're always looking forward to the coming Messiah? When you think about this Messiah is coming, how did the people at that time think? I mean, there were real people living at that time. What did they look, what did the world look like to them? Well, actually, it's actually not that hard for us to imagine it because we actually do much the same today because we are still looking forward to the coming Messiah. We're just looking forward to his second coming because his second coming is basically the same thing that they were looking forward to. They were looking forward to the victory that was to come. They didn't understand what the victory was going to look like, but they knew it was going to be the victory. And we're still looking forward to that victory. Now, on animal suffering, because this is the great introduction of animal suffering, right? The ground is cursed because of the sin of man. So, in order to make clothes for Adam and Eve, God, of course, killed an animal. The animal was innocent. It was an innocent sacrifice to cover over the shame of these freshly minted sinners. And this would be the first and only time that God has ever offered an animal sacrifice. And in so doing, he indicated the kind of action that would be required to cover over our shame. The thing that he's going to end up requiring them to do in order to continue covering over their own shame. That is the sacrifice of innocent blood, an action that would be repeated countless times throughout the ages. And nothing else would do. And why? Because guilty human blood is no good to cover over sin. It's already tainted, it's already guilty. It's like pouring tar over a car in order to clean off the mud. It just doesn't work. And this, of course, is also completely unfair to the animals. They never signed up for this. They weren't the ones who did the bad thing. They didn't sign up to be in a world that was completely fallen, a world filled with wildfires and predators and disease and starvation. The animals were created to be used by us, certainly true, but they weren't created to suffer, and certainly not without reason. God is generally blamed for this, of course, because everybody likes to blame God for everything. If God had created a world free of free will agents, I mean, then the animals would not have suffered, right? It would have been perfect. It would have been paradise for the animals. And the only problem was that God made us. And of course, if it were the case, the animals also would never have existed. Why? Well, because it's highly doubtful that God would have created a world for the purpose of filling it with just dumb animals. Why would he do that? Rather, he created the world for the purpose of filling it with free will agents, with filling it with humans. The animals are there to support the humans, not the other way around. The animals were then given to the humans in order to have what they would need, that is what the humans would need to live and to work and to build and to bend nature to their will. The big downside is the animals are at the mercy of the humans. And who's this a downside for? Well, namely the animals. This means that when these humans turned rogue, the animals ended up suffering the consequences for their own master's foolishness. This is very much the same as when the leader of a country enacts foolish laws for which the people under their rule suffer. Or when you have a city that's under siege and the king says, I will never give up, and the people all row. Because it is they who will first and foremost suffer the consequences. Ultimately, we are the masters of the animals, and it's on us to ensure their proper use and care. Of course, we will never ensure their proper use and care. If anyone's upset about the brutality of nature towards animals, a couple of points might help. First, no animal suffers in excess of what one singular animal can suffer. This is actually just a universal truth. We look at the starvation of thousands of animals. We do this with people too. Thousands or millions of different animals. But the maximum suffering inflicted is actually just on one. Because there are no animals who feel the suffering of all. Now, that said, God does. He can feel the suffering of all. But for each one of us as a mortal being, we can only feel the suffering that one person, or for the animals, one animal, ever feel. Now, this doesn't diminish the pain or the suffering that one feels, but just to put it in context. Second, the suffering of animals should remind us of the consequences of our rebellion before God. We should look at that suffering and we should say, Dear God, what does that say about us? Because we are the reason why it happened. Imagine a king standing on the balcony with his advisor, and he's looking out over his city, and his advisor tells him, Look, sire, your people are suffering. You need to do this or that thing. Likewise, I would tell you, look at the suffering all over the earth, suffering of various humans and all the animals, and say this must be corrected. And it can only be corrected at the feet of God. Now, perhaps you don't think God's being fair by requiring his humans to comply with his rules or to comply with the way he designed his humans to be. That's just not fair. But as it turns out, God did not consult you when he made his universe. Maybe for the next universe, you can tell him that his creatures should be able to spit in his eye without any consequences. In the meantime, this is his planet, and he likes for his humans to behave better than barbarians. See you later.